All right, guys, welcome back to DeCecco's History here for you. And if you're watching this, it's because you want to get a feel for immigration in American history. I'm going to take you all the way back to colonial immigration, and we're going to get you up to the late 1800s. So let's get it going here. Obviously, you see this picture here. If you see something like this on a test, these are immigrants who have packed up their stuff, made their way on some boat all the way across the Atlantic Ocean, and they're going to enter America probably through the Ellis Island here. So as we begin to look at colonial immigration, so I'm taking you all the way back to the 16 and 1700s, right? So these groups of people really took place from the first colonial immigrants through the Declaration of Independence. That's kind of the time period we're looking at. And the different groups that came at that time, as you can see, we're looking at predominantly from England. There were some Scotch, Irish, some Germans, some Sweden, some Dutch, and then you have the African came via slavery. But the predominant group is going to be England. So the majority of people living in America during the colonial period are going to be English. All right. So when you see the little settlement here, obviously the biggest group you're going to have is that pink. You're going to see pink predominantly everywhere up and down the coastlines. Mostly the Germans going to be around in Pennsylvania, down in Virginia. You have some German settlements there, but once again, mostly English. There were some other groups, right? Well, we got to take a look at reasons for immigration. So why did people come to America, and what were those reasons? We're also going to refer to these as push factors. So, why are people coming, right? So one is for political freedom. If there was a big change in the government, some people had to get rid of the new regime or they had to leave for some reason. So some came for political freedom. Some came simply because they wanted to worship as they wanted. So there's religious freedom. The biggest reason is probably going to be economics, right? They came to improve their economic situation. That is, they wanted to make more money. They weren't situated that too very well where they were from. So they were looking to increase their financial situation. And one last really push factor is going to be slavery. Some people were forced, right? They were forced out of their homelands, sold to a life of slavery, and they made their way to the American colonies, right? So that's early colonial immigration. There are different areas of settlement. So what we find when I showed you that map, the English settled along the Atlantic coast from Maine to Georgia and as far in as the Appalachian Mountains. So during the 1700s, we really didn't make our way past the Appalachian Mountains. That happens late 1700s, early 1800s. You'll see that, right? There is some Dutch. They settled in New York, New Jersey, and down through Pennsylvania. So there are some Dutch settlements there. Heavy German population in Pennsylvania, as I showed you. The Scots-Irish are not going to be settling along the coast. They're going to move further inwards into the back country, down in through the Appalachians and the areas of the Carolinas. You will find the majority of Africans were forced onto the southern colonial plantations. That's where they were forced to go, and that's where they were doing their work. So there's that map again for you. If you want to pause that and study it, you're good to go. What was happening and where we live over here in Buffalo, Lackawanna, there was a huge Six Nations settlement right here. These are all Native Americans, part of the Iroquois, all right? And then obviously past the Appalachians, you have all of your Native American settlements, and they were hoping to stay there. But as we know, white settlement will pursue them, right? There were definitely, it wasn't easy to make that move. So when these immigrants got here, there were certain difficulties. Number one, conflict with Native Americans, right? Because the white people kept taking more land. Native Americans weren't happy about that. The other challenges are just basic survival stuff, right? You had to overcome the challenges of living in a new place. You had to build homes, set up farms. Sometimes the land wasn't great. Sometimes the winters were ruthless. So you had to do those things in order to survive. And obviously, the death tolls were pretty high in the beginning there. So when we look at colonial contributions, you'll find that there was a lot that they offered in terms of they established a culture similar to what they were living in Europe. It will take a few generations, and they will kind of Americanize or assimilate into this blending of American culture, right? They brought an English form of language. They spoke with that English accent. They brought in their own forms of government. We pretty much copied the English government that we had that they had over in England here in America. They practiced predominantly Protestant religions as they did over in England, but there were different forms of Protestantism, and they basically kept their family traditions. I mean, you don't just lose that stuff; you kind of keep it with you. So we're going to deal with old immigration first, and then we're going to move forward to new immigration. So the old immigration are going to be the groups that came after the colonial period, but right before the Civil War. They came up to the Civil War. So people came from the establishment of the United States, colonial period, up to around the 1850s, 1860s, right in there. Most of those immigrants, once again, came from Northern and Western Europe. If you've been paying attention in class, we've been really highlighting that, right? Old immigrants, Northern and Western Europe. What were the groups? British, Irish, German, and then the Scandinavian peoples, right? Those are from the Northern Europe. They're really white. Why did they come? So these specific groups, now we're going to give you some specifics. The potato famine was really horrible for the Irish. Disease, poor rainfall, really devastated the potato crop, and people were dying by the thousands. So what did the Irish do? They packed up their stuff, came to the United States, right? The reason for German immigration here is there was political revolutions, a series of them, changes in the government, so a lot of them came to seek peace, seek stability, and gain a new start in America. So that was the reason for German immigrants. Some people simply came to better their economic opportunities. So the big one here is going to be money, right? They came to better their situation. Well, where did they settle? The Irish are going to be settled in cities in the Northeast. They were really good workers. They weren't treated too well simply because they were Roman Catholic, whereas the earlier immigrants were predominantly Protestant, right? Germans, you'll find, they stayed in the cities, but some began to move on onto that frontier to set up small farms and push the envelope, all right? Scandinavians definitely moved out onto the frontier in the Appalachians and beyond the Appalachian Mountains and began farming. So that's what those three groups are doing. So there are some difficulties that these early groups faced. Number one, the nation was predominantly Protestant. And here come these Irish, and some Germans were actually Roman Catholic. So they faced a series of hostilities. They weren't liked simply because of their religion. Americans resented new groups and feared those new groups are going to spread new ideas, compete, and take my job. So that's the reason for kind of the anti-German and anti-Irish sentiment. So here we go. Here comes the poorhouse from Galway. You have all these Irish immigrants, and they're on their way over, and they're going to bring bad ideas. So this is kind of a cartoon that's not too favorable for the Irish. And you'll see this Nina, N-I-N-A. This may be posted outside of a little bar, a saloon, maybe even a factory, and it says, yeah, we need help. We need workers. But if you're Irish, don't even apply for the job. We're not going to hire you simply because you're Irish. So be aware of that, right? Now, there were some contributions from these early groups, and we'll kind of focus on the Irish here. They were really good workers. They had to work hard because they were given the worst jobs, because they weren't liked because they were Roman Catholic. They became really good railroad builders, and if you want to talk about the most successful canal in American history, the Erie Canal, it was built by Irishmen. Germans, Scandinavians, they became farmers on that frontier. They brought advanced farming techniques. The Germans specifically brought new educational ideas. There were no physical education classes in our schools until the Germans really wanted them introduced. And the idea of a kindergarten, getting kids to school at an earlier age so they get those foundations, numbers and letters and sounds and words, so they can be successful in first grade. So the idea of kindergarten came from the Germans. So if you're a kid, you hate a kindergarten, blame the Germans, all right? So that's pretty much the old immigration. So we're going to move on to the new immigrants. There's kind of a picture of a bunch of immigrants who were coming into the country. Some of them are a little scared because they don't know what to expect. Some of them are happy. They're saying, hey, man, it's time to get started. I'm ready to go to America, right? So there's some mixed feelings among that picture that you see, right? Here you see some German immigrants who are digging along a little canal here. They're doing most of the work, right? I mean, they were really good canal diggers, right? All right, new immigration. All right, so this is going to be, you're going to be thinking about this after the Civil War, new immigration. They're going to come to America pretty much post-Civil War, so 1870s up until around the 1920s. So the time period that we really refer to in terms of the new immigration, late 1800s. Most of these immigrants are going to come not from Northern and Western Europe. They're going to come from Southern and Eastern Europe, and there is a group that came from Asia. So I give you the countries here if you need to kind of remember, where we're talking about. Most of them came from Italy and Poland, Russia and Japan and China. So you got your two Asian groups, and you have a bunch of Eastern European groups. All right. Why did they come? What's going on? Well, it's pretty easy, right? They came for economic opportunities. They simply came to better their condition, right? Find a job, get a job, make money. That wherever they were living, it wasn't going well for them in terms of their pocketbook or their wallet. All right. Some of them did come for some political freedoms, but this group of people, for sure, there were pogroms in Russia. There were programs that were really against Jewish people. So the Russian Jews had to get out of Dodge. They got out of Russia, and where did they come? They came to America seeking religious freedom. So once again, these are called push factors, right? Though actually this one's a pull factor, right? That's attracting them, and that's getting them out of there, right? So I know you're push and pull factors. There's a nice little picture of some immigrants coming in. Where did they settle? Areas of settlement. Most new immigrants settled in cities. These new immigrants from the late 1800s are going to settle in the crowded cities in the Northeast, all right? They lived in places called ghettos. Now, don't use the term ghetto like you would use it today. Ghettos were areas around cities which were urban, poor, and really one single group lived there. And I can give you some examples. You may find like a Chinatown in a city, or Little Italy in New York City. Those are examples of ghettos, right? Asian immigrants are not going to settle on the East Coast. They're going to settle on the West Coast in and around California, all right? These groups for sure experienced some difficulties. So as we begin to look at them, they didn't come as whole families. They were really birds of passage, as they were called. So they came alone, and it really put a lot of strain on the families because maybe you didn't have the whole family unit here. Well, their kids were learning English, and they were learning American taste and American customs, and the family as a unit tried to really hold on to their cultural stuff. Parents feared their culture, that the children were going to lose that religious, cultural heritage and become Americanized, which wasn't a bad thing, but the parents didn't want that. They wanted to hold on to their home life, what they used to have at home. Now, there is a group of people who absolutely, positively do not like these new immigrants. And these are the native-born Americans. So these are, you really don't think of native as in terms of like Native American. These are a group called nativists. These are the white people that are already in America. And they don't like these new immigrants coming in because, number one, that new person might take my job. It's getting really crowded in these cities, and really, they're just different. They don't speak English. They come with different religions, and they're really resented. They're really not liked. So you got to know that term nativist. That's a white Protestant who's already in America who doesn't like these new groups coming in. All right. Although life was tough for them, they did make some key contributions. So let's take a look at them, right? Young Italian and Jewish girls worked really hard in sweatshops in the garment industry. So they were making clothes in textile mills, all right? The Polish people, the Slavic people, they were really good coal miners and steel workers in the Pennsylvania and the Midwest. The Chinese workers, they were tremendous railroad builders. They would do anything using dynamite in the mountainside. So they got hired out west to build the railroads to connect the west to the east. Really, all of these immigrants together, they aided America's expansion, and they contributed to our great diversity. It's something that we can celebrate in America today. We certainly have a diverse country with a lot of different people, all right? There you see some girls working in a sweatshop, right? They're working in a textile mill. That's all thread. That's a little sewing machine, and they're making fabric, right? The big reaction against immigration is going to come from that group I already mentioned, and that is the nativist, or the idea of nativism. It's the belief that native-born Americans and their ways of life were bigger, superior, better than any of these new groups coming in. So if you're a nativist, you don't like immigrants, right? Descendants of old immigrants were the nativists who opposed the new immigrants. It's kind of hypocritical because America was good enough for their grandparents and maybe their great-grandparents, but now it's not good enough for these new immigrants coming in. So if you're a nativist, what do you believe? The new languages, the new religions, all those new traditions coming in are going to have a negative impact on America. Well, that's not necessarily the case, but if you're a nativist, that's what you believe. All right. What else do they believe? The jobs. If these new immigrants come in, they're going to take my job. So what does a nativist really want? They want the government to make laws to not let these people in. Don't let those new immigrants in. So they want laws to limit immigration. And I'll take you through a series of those laws right now. So look at this. Native Americans beware of foreign influence. And that, look what's happening to the end on influence is backwards, because those new people are going to turn America backwards. No good, right? You'll find this in San Francisco. Japs keep moving. This is a white man's neighborhood, right? Clearly showing you that these people in California don't want those Asian immigrants moving in. So you should see that. So as we begin to see the reaction, it's going to be pretty bad, right? Immigrants often encounter prejudice and discrimination against them. There were certain jokes and stereotypes that were common amongst these new groups. And the nativists they tried to pressure the government to make laws against these immigrants coming in. So that's the reaction, the negativity against all of these new groups. Famous picture in Puck magazine. Be careful I say that. It's Puck magazine. You have these old immigrants here who have become rich and really enjoy America. Behind them are their grandparents who were once immigrants. And what are they telling this new immigrant? Probably from, I don't know, Italy or maybe Russia. They're saying, no, buddy, don't come in. We don't want you because you don't speak English. You're bringing in a different religion and you might take my job, right? Yeah, this is great, right? Uncle Sam. This is a pro-immigration cartoon. This is anti-immigration. This is for immigration. Uncle Sam, arms wide open, saying, yo, come on down. It is the Ark of Refuge. We take anybody, right? Why are these people coming? There's no taxes. There's no kings. There's no dungeons and no jails. No forced military service. These are all reasons why they're leaving, where they're coming from, and where are they walking? They're walking into America. We're taking you in, right? So this is a nice little chart for you to study, all right? So along with those reactions, these are all things that the nativists push for that they got. So if you need to know them, you got them there, right? I'll leave that for you. The Know Nothing Party was a party before the Civil War that did not like immigrants, and they were pressuring the government to not let these people in. So that political party is against immigrants, and they were big around the 1850s. This is pretty easy right here. The Chinese Exclusion Act. What did they do? The government in 1882 said, yo, we don't want these Asians coming into the country anymore. So Congress passed the law limiting Chinese immigration. It's against immigration. Exclusion Act. Gentlemen's Agreement's a nice one. We treated the Japanese so bad in San Francisco. Our President Roosevelt dialed up the Japanese government and made a deal with them saying, hey, we'll try to treat your people better. Just don't send any more to America. So we made an agreement with the Japanese. All right. As you can see, the laws get tougher as we continue right up to 1924. In 1917, Congress said, hey, if you can't get admitted into America unless you can read or write, and we're going to make you take a test. If you can pass the test, you can come in. And they did actually offer the test in their native language, but most of these new immigrants, they couldn't read and write anyways. So if you can't read and write, you can't come in. The last two get really bad. The Emergency Quota Act of 1921. This law limited the number of immigrants to the United States to only about 350,000. We put a cap on the amount of people we were going to let in. And then finally, the National Origins Act of 1924 further reduced immigration, but it allowed more Northern and Western Europeans to come in. So then British can still come in. And those Germans could still come in because they're Protestant, but none of them new Catholics. We don't want them Jewish people either, right? And this was what the government was doing in the early 1900s because the nativists pressured the government to do that, okay? So now we know we have immigrants coming in. The last piece of this, what we're going to do, here's your funnel. Here's your 1924 funnel, right? We're going to cap it at a percentage. So all these people are trying to come into the country, but Uncle Sam's going to say, hey, we only want a small percentage of you in here because we want to keep an eye on you, right? So I go back to that. It's a pretty great cartoon. You can check that out. Pause it if you want to, but I'm going to move on. Immigrants in American society, they came here, they stayed here. What was their experience? How did they become Americanized? There's three theories. I'll give you all three of them. The first one is an old theory, and this is what historians really thought that immigrants would do, and that is the melting pot theory. So people from various places are going to come to America. They're going to come to the United States, and they're just going to blend together to form what's called an American culture. All right. The contributions of individual groups are not easily distinguished because everyone's just becoming American, right? The main culture is more important than the one you brought with you, right? Here's the problem, though. The melting pot as a theory required immigrants to hop on board, come to America, and leave their culture, leave the stuff, and their home stuff, and their language, and just become American. Well, this happens, but it doesn't happen right away. It takes time. It takes generations, right? And the easy way to remember the soup theory is, the melting pot theory would be the soup. If you put all the vegetables in a soup and you boil the heck out of it, it's just going to become one broth, one American broth. So you see my little diagram there. You can check that out. Chinese, Irish, Italian. They're all going to come together to become American. That's one theory. Now, the other theory is more of an assimilation theory. And as we go through that, you might be inclined to see that. So immigrants disappeared into an already established American culture. Maybe not first generation, but you see this in second, third generation. So people become Americanized or assimilated. What word is an assimilated? If you're in my class, you'll find similar. They become similar. So what do? They adopt American dress. They begin speaking American language like English. They adopt American attitudes, and they just kind of become assimilated. So immigrants from Asia and Africa had a tougher time becoming assimilated because of where they came from, whereas some of the Southern and Eastern Europeans had an easier time. Now, the other theory, which most historians are kind of gravitating towards right now, is what's called the pluralism theory. Right? And that is groups who come don't always lose their distinctive characteristics. Different cultures living next to each other contribute to society in many different ways. And this is known as the salad bowl theory. So the soup is, hey, everyone comes here and they're all just American and it's all great. The salad bowl theory is, we're all American, but when you look at the salad, you can see the tomato, you can see the cucumber, you can see the lettuce, and we're all American, but we hold on to some of that cultural stuff. The dress, the foods we eat, the clothes that we wear, the cultures at our holiday time, and that's more like, America's more like a mixed salad. So as you go back and look at those three different theories, you can kind of make a judgment call on which one you think is more correct, all right? Make sure you answer the question at the bottom of the sheet, and we'll look forward to seeing you again.